What happens when America's sweetheart grows up in a house where love feels like a luxury she can't afford? Sally Field's story isn't just about Hollywood success. It's about a little girl in Pasadena who learned to smile through pain so early that even she forgot where the performance ended and the real Sally began. Tonight, we're peeling back the layers of one of our most beloved actresses to reveal the childhood trauma that would follow her from those quiet nights in California all the way to the Academy Awards stage. Because what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about the woman who made us believe she could fly. Sally Field's story begins in Pasadena, California in 1946. She was born into what seemed like an ordinary American family, but behind the suburban facade lay a storm that would shape her entire life. Her father, Richard Dryden Field, was an Army officer. Her mother, Margaret Field, was an actress with dreams of her own in Hollywood. But those dreams were never fully realized, and the strain of disappointment weighed heavily on the household. When Sally was just 4 years old, her parents' marriage collapsed. Divorce in the 1950s carried a heavy stigma, and for a young child like Sally, the separation planted a seed of confusion and abandonment that she would carry with her for years. Living with her mother after the divorce, Sally was often caught between two worlds. On one side was her mother, struggling to find stability and remarried too quickly. On the other was her father, distant and largely absent from her life. To a young girl, it felt like neither parent could provide the steady foundation she desperately needed. Even as a child, Sally sensed that she was different. More sensitive, more vulnerable than others her age. She withdrew into herself, often seeking solitude. Her classmates may have seen only a quiet little girl, but deep inside, she was already learning how to put on a mask, to hide pain behind a smile. At night, when the house was quiet, Sally wrestled with fears she could not put into words. She longed for security, for the feeling of being protected. Instead, what awaited her was the shadow of something much darker. A secret that would haunt her well into adulthood. The innocence of her childhood had already been fractured by divorce, but the remarriage of her mother would expose Sally to an environment far more damaging than anyone could imagine. A new stepfather entered the picture, and with him came a secret torment Sally would carry in silence for decades. Before we continue with Sally Field's incredible journey, if you're finding this story as moving as I am, take a second to hit the like button. It really helps more people discover these powerful stories. And if you want to see more untold Hollywood histories, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Alright, let's get back to Sally's story. For now, though, she was just a little girl in Pasadena, already beginning to understand that life would not be easy, that the world could be harsh, and that love itself could feel fragile and uncertain. These early wounds, abandonment, instability, and the aching absence of safety, were the first chapters in a story that would shape the woman she would one day become. When Sally's mother remarried, it seemed at first like a chance for stability. The man who entered their lives was Jock Mahoney, a Hollywood stuntman and actor. To the outside world, Mahoney looked strong, successful, even glamorous. But behind closed doors, the reality was chilling. In her 2018 memoir, In Pieces, Sally finally revealed the devastating truth she had carried in silence for decades. Jock Mahoney had sexually abused her throughout her childhood. For young Sally, the abuse was not only terrifying, it was confusing. She had no words to describe what was happening to her, and no safe place to turn. Children who endure this kind of trauma often blame themselves, and Sally was no different. She buried the pain deep inside, convinced that her silence was the only way to survive. Each time she appeared to smile in public, each time she played the role of the happy daughter, she was hiding a storm of guilt and shame that no child should ever have to carry. Her mother, perhaps too wrapped up in her marriage and career, never seemed to see the suffering her daughter was enduring. For Sally, this absence of protection was a second betrayal. Not only was she hurt by her stepfather, she was left unseen by the one person who should have been her shield. That double wound would follow her for the rest of her life, shaping her relationships, her career, and the way she saw herself. As Sally grew older, the abuse and secrecy left scars that were invisible to the world but deeply embedded within her. She struggled with feelings of worthlessness and a belief that she was somehow broken, unworthy of real love. That inner turmoil would later bleed into her romantic life and her constant battles with self-esteem. Yet, in a strange and painful way, it also gave her something she would later use as an actress: the ability to access raw emotion. When she performed, she wasn't simply pretending. She was drawing from a reservoir of real-life pain, fear, and vulnerability that very few people ever knew about. For years, the world adored Sally Field for her charm, her sweetness, and her energy. But behind that image was a dark truth she could not yet share. She had been living with a secret that haunted her every day. A secret that would shape the roles she chose, the relationships she entered, and the struggles she would face. Long after the cameras stopped rolling, this hidden trauma was the silent foundation of her life. A burden she carried until she was strong enough to speak it aloud many years later. By then, Sally Field was a beloved star, an Academy Award winner, and a woman admired by millions. But the scars of her childhood never truly faded. They simply became part of the complex woman the world would one day come to know. For Sally Field, childhood had been marked by silence, fear, and shame. But as she entered her teenage years, she discovered a place where that silence could be broken. A place where her pain could be transformed into something powerful. That place was the stage. At school, Sally joined the drama club. What might have seemed like an after-school activity for most kids quickly became her lifeline. Acting offered her something she had never felt before: freedom. When she stepped into a role, she wasn't Sally anymore. She wasn't the little girl carrying a terrible secret. She wasn't the quiet daughter navigating a broken home. She could be anyone: confident, bold, fearless. Each rehearsal, each performance, gave her a chance to escape from the darkness of her reality. While other teenagers experimented with hobbies or sports, Sally poured her soul into becoming other characters. For the first time, she felt in control of her story, even if it was only for the length of a scene. Teachers and classmates noticed her talent. She had a presence that couldn't be ignored, a raw emotion that made her performances feel real. What they didn't know was that Sally wasn't just acting. She was surviving. Every line spoken on stage, every tear, every burst of laughter, carried echoes of the little girl who had endured far more than anyone imagined. Acting became more than a passion. It became her refuge, her shield against the chaos of her private life. In the safety of drama class, Sally could finally breathe. And as she immersed herself in the craft, she began to dream of something bigger. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just an escape. Maybe it was a path. Hollywood wasn't far away. The bright lights of Los Angeles seemed like a different world. But to Sally, they represented possibility, an open door to a life beyond pain. She didn't yet know how, but she felt pulled toward it, as though destiny itself was guiding her toward the stage and screen. For the young girl who once felt invisible, performing gave her visibility. For the child who felt voiceless, acting gave her a voice. It was the beginning of a journey that would take Sally from the shadows of her troubled childhood to the dazzling spotlight of Hollywood stardom. But that spotlight would not come without its own price. And soon, Sally Field would learn that the dream of success in Hollywood could be just as complicated and just as painful as the secrets she had left behind. By the mid-1960s, Sally Field was just a teenager trying to find her place in the world. She had been using acting as a refuge, a way to cope with the pain of her childhood. But she hadn't yet imagined how quickly her life would change. At only 19 years old, she auditioned for a new television show called Gidget. The producers were looking for a fresh face, someone with a natural charm who could embody the spirit of the times. Youthful, playful, and innocent. Sally fit the part, perfectly. Her big brown eyes and quick smile lit up the screen, and within weeks, she was cast as the lead. When Gidget premiered in 1965, audiences instantly connected with her. Sally played the role of a teenage surfer girl navigating crushes, family life, and youthful adventures. To millions of viewers, she wasn't just an actress. She was the girl next door, someone they felt they knew, someone they wanted to be. For the network, it was exactly what they had hoped for. Sally was marketable, relatable, and instantly beloved. But for Sally herself, the success felt far more complicated. On the surface, she smiled and played along with the cheerful image that Gidget demanded. But inside, she was conflicted. The role that had catapulted her into the spotlight also felt like a cage. Gidget was bubbly, lighthearted, and shallow, completely at odds with the depth of emotion Sally carried inside her. After years of surviving trauma, she knew she had more to express than a few lines of sitcom comedy. She began to feel that Hollywood wasn't interested in who she really was, but only in who they wanted her to be. And in those early years, she had no power to push back. If she wanted to stay employed, she had to keep playing the part. It was a painful contradiction. On one hand, Gidget gave her exactly what so many young actors only dream about: fame, paycheck, and recognition. On the other hand, it forced her into a role that didn't reflect her truth. She wanted to be taken seriously, to show her emotional range, to dive into characters with substance. Instead, she was boxed into being the perky surfer girl, the comic relief, the innocent teenager. The disconnect grew heavier with each episode. In interviews, she was asked about her looks, her charm, her on-screen romances, but rarely about her talent. To executives, she was a product, a brand to be packaged neatly for an audience. For Sally, who had endured so much pain behind the scenes, this shallow perception only deepened her sense of isolation. Still, she pressed forward. Despite her frustration, she poured her energy into the role, determined not to let audiences see how miserable she felt. And in a strange way, her ability to hide her pain and give viewers what they wanted became a kind of survival skill. The same one she had learned as a child, when she smiled on the outside while hiding her suffering inside. The series only lasted one season, but its impact was undeniable. Gidget introduced Sally Field to Hollywood, gave her a platform, and showed the world that she had star power. Yet the experience left her with a sobering realization. Fame did not equal fulfillment. She had achieved the dream of becoming a television star, but the reality was far lonelier and more frustrating than she had ever imagined. Instead of celebrating, she felt trapped. Instead of finding freedom, she felt boxed in. And though the cameras stopped rolling when Gidget was canceled, the stereotype of the cute, bubbly girl would follow her long after the show ended. For Sally, Gidget was the first taste of what would become a lifelong struggle, proving to the world, and to herself, that she was more than a stereotype, more than a pretty face, more than just America's sweetheart. And that struggle would only grow more intense with her next role, one that would bring her even greater visibility, but also push her deeper into the battle between public image and private truth. After Gidget was canceled, Sally Field hoped her next project would finally give her the chance to break free of the cute girl stereotype. She longed for roles that would challenge her and prove she was more than just a bubbly teenager. But in 1967, she found herself cast in a show that would become both famous and infamous, The Flying Nun. The premise was as odd as it sounds. Sally played Sister Bertrille, a novice nun whose oversized habit, with wide wing-like headpieces, allowed her to literally take flight when the wind was strong enough. It was a quirky, light-hearted sitcom, designed for laughs rather than depth. To audiences at home, it was entertaining, Families tuned in every week, charmed by Sally's innocence and the show's whimsical tone. It ran for 3 seasons, cementing her as a household name. But behind the scenes, Sally was miserable. Wearing the costume, a nun's habit topped with enormous floppy wings, felt humiliating to her. Every time she stepped onto the set, she wrestled with the same gnawing thought. Is this really what my career has become? Instead of moving towards serious, respected work, she was now playing a flying nun on television. For a young actress desperate to prove her talent, the experience was crushing. She feared she was being typecast forever, trapped in silly, shallow roles that would prevent her from ever being taken seriously. That fear soon spiraled into depression. Sally began to doubt herself, wondering if perhaps she wasn't capable of more. She was already battling the emotional scars from her childhood trauma, and now her professional life felt like a cruel joke. Acting was supposed to be her refuge, her way to transform pain into art. But instead, it had become another source of humiliation. Worse still, Hollywood executives dismissed her concerns. To them, she was doing exactly what she was supposed to: smiling, performing, keeping audiences entertained. They didn't see the young woman behind the habit, quietly sinking into despair. Sally later confessed that during the filming of The Flying Nun, she felt isolated and trapped, with little support. She endured constant jokes from peers about the absurdity of the show, and each time she heard the laughter, it cut a little deeper. What the world saw as comedy, Sally experienced as shame. Yet through all of this, she persevered. She showed up on set, learned her lines, and delivered performances that kept the show running for 82 episodes. It was a testament to her resilience, even in the face of deep personal unhappiness. Looking back, Sally described The Flying Nun as both a curse and a strange kind of gift. The curse was obvious. She spent years battling the damage it did to her credibility as an actress. Casting directors couldn't see past the flying habit, and for a long time, she struggled to get auditions for serious roles. But the gift was subtler. Those years taught her endurance. They forced her to develop a thick skin, to dig deeper, and to keep fighting for the career she truly wanted. If she could survive the humiliation of The Flying Nun, she realized, she could survive almost anything. Still, in the late 1960s, Sally Field stood at a crossroads. To the world, she was a light-hearted TV star adored by millions. But privately, she felt defeated, stuck in a role that mocked her talent and eroded her self-confidence. The question that haunted her was simple: would she ever escape the shadow of The Flying Nun? And in the years ahead, Sally would take desperate, determined steps to prove that she could. By the early 1970s, Sally Field had reached a breaking point. The Flying Nun had made her famous, but it had also left her branded as a lightweight, a comic curiosity. Casting directors still saw her as the cheerful girl in a habit with wings, not as a serious actress with depth and complexity. Sally knew that if she didn't take control of her career, she would be stuck in shallow roles forever. And so, she made a bold, life-altering decision. She enrolled at the Actors Studio in Los Angeles. The Actors Studio was no ordinary acting school. Founded on the teachings of Konstantin Stanislavski and run by legendary coach Lee Strasberg, it was the home of method acting in America. It had trained giants like Marlon Brando, James Dean, and Al Pacino. For Sally, it was intimidating territory. She was walking into a world of serious actors, artists who lived and breathed their craft. At first, she was terrified. She felt out of place, like an imposter in a room full of geniuses. For years, she had been dismissed as a TV star, someone whose career was built on fluff. Now she had to prove, to others, but more importantly to herself, that she belonged. Under Strasberg's guidance, Sally began to strip away the masks she had worn all her life. Strasberg pushed her to draw from her own experiences, to pour her private pain into her work. It was grueling, emotional, and often overwhelming. For the first time, Sally began to connect the dots between her personal struggles and her art. The abandonment she felt as a child, the trauma she endured in silence, the shame of being ridiculed in Hollywood. All of it could be fuel. Instead of burying her pain, she could channel it, transform it, and make it real on stage. And in that process, something profound began to happen. Acting stopped being just a way to escape. It became a way to heal. She later recalled how liberating it was to be in that environment, surrounded by teachers and peers who didn't care about her sitcom past, but who recognized the raw power of her performances. For the first time in her career, Sally felt seen, not as Gidget, not as the flying nun, but as Sally Field, the actress. The training wasn't easy. Strasberg demanded total vulnerability, which meant confronting wounds she had long tried to suppress. But every time she stepped into a scene, every time she allowed herself to crack open emotionally, she grew stronger. Slowly, she began to believe in her own talent. Slowly, she began to reclaim her voice. This turning point reshaped the trajectory of her career. Without the actor's studio, Sally might have remained trapped in television comedies, remembered only for roles she despised. Instead, she emerged with a deeper understanding of her craft and the courage to demand more from Hollywood. It was at the actor's studio that Sally forged the resilience she would need for the next phase of her life. The industry was still skeptical of her. Many still saw her as a lightweight. But Sally now carried something powerful within her: conviction. She knew who she was, and she knew what she could do. And soon, the world would see it too. Because from this point forward, Sally Field was no longer just a television personality. She was an actress ready to redefine her destiny. By the mid-1970s, Sally Field was determined to prove herself. The Flying Nun was still a shadow over her career, and despite her training at the actor's studio, Hollywood remained reluctant to take her seriously. Casting directors continued to slot her into lighthearted, shallow roles. Then came the chance. That would change everything. Sybil. The television miniseries told the harrowing true story of a young woman suffering from dissociative identity disorder, what was then called multiple personality disorder. The role demanded emotional range, intensity, and vulnerability unlike anything Sally had ever attempted on screen. It was a risk. If she failed, the industry would dismiss her forever. But if she succeeded, she could finally break free from the stereotypes that had confined her. From the moment she read the script, Sally felt an almost electric connection to the role. The fractured psyche of Sybil, the pain, the confusion, the desperate need to be understood, resonated deeply with her own life. She had carried scars from her childhood, and at the actor's studio she had learned to channel that pain into her work. Now, she had a chance to pour all of it into one performance. On set, Sally gave herself over completely. She embodied each of Sybil's personalities with such precision and authenticity that the transformation was startling. In one scene, she might be fragile and childlike, her voice trembling with fear. In the next, she could be furious, violent, or unrecognizable, as if an entirely new person had taken over her body. It was exhausting work, physically and emotionally. Playing Sybil meant reliving trauma every day, peeling back layers of pain that were often uncomfortably close to her own. But Sally refused to hold back. She wanted truth, raw, unflinching truth, and she gave it with every scene. When Sybil aired in 1976, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Viewers were stunned. Critics who had once dismissed her as nothing more than Gidget or the Flying Nun suddenly saw her in a new light. The depth of her performance silenced the doubters. For the first time, Hollywood took Sally Field seriously. The role earned her an Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actress in a limited series, a moment that felt like vindication. After years of humiliation, rejection, and being underestimated, Sally had finally proven, to the world and to herself, that she was an actress of extraordinary talent. But the impact of Sybil went beyond awards. It was a cultural milestone, one of the first mainstream depictions of dissociative identity disorder, and it opened conversations about mental health that had long been hidden in silence. Sally's fearless performance gave a human face to a misunderstood illness, and for many viewers, it was both shocking and deeply moving. Looking back, Sally described Sybil as the role that saved her. It not only transformed her career, but also gave her the confidence to pursue the kinds of roles she had always dreamed of: complex, layered characters who reflected real human struggles. Still, the triumph came with a heavy cost. The emotional toll of inhabiting Sybil's fractured mind left her drained, forcing her to confront her own past wounds more directly than ever before. But Sally knew this was the path she had chosen, and she accepted the pain as part of her craft. With Sybil, Sally Field had done more than win an award. She had shattered the box Hollywood tried to keep her in. She was no longer the flying nun. She was no longer just a sitcom actress. She was, undeniably, one of the most powerful performers of her generation. And as the late 1970s approached, Sally's career was no longer a question mark. It was a promise. The world had seen what she was capable of, and greater triumphs were yet to come. By the late 1970s, Sally Field had fought long and hard to shed her image as a lightweight sitcom star. Sybil had been her breakthrough. But one extraordinary performance does not guarantee respect in Hollywood. The industry still doubted her staying power. Could she sustain a career at the highest level, or was she destined to fade back into obscurity? That answer came in 1979 with Norma Rae. Based on a true story, Norma Rae told the tale of a Southern textile worker who risked everything to unionize her factory. It was a gritty, working-class drama, raw, political, and emotionally charged. The role demanded toughness, vulnerability, and a kind of lived-in realism that very few actresses could bring to the screen. When the script reached Sally, she knew immediately that it was the role she had been waiting for. This was not a glamorous part. Norma Rae was an ordinary woman, a single mother with a difficult life and few choices. But she also possessed extraordinary courage. For Sally, it was the perfect opportunity to channel the fire and resilience she had been building within herself for years. On set, she threw herself into the role with total commitment. She immersed herself in the world of factory workers, studying their lives, their struggles, their exhaustion, and their quiet dignity. She learned the rhythms of the Southern accent, the grit of the factory floor, the weight of the machinery. Every detail mattered. But beyond the research, it was Sally's emotional truth that made Norma Rae unforgettable. She poured into the role the same sense of defiance she had carried throughout her own career. The determination to be taken seriously, to rise above the dismissive labels, to fight for respect in a world that underestimated her. The defining scene of the film has since become iconic. Norma Rae, standing on a factory table holding up a cardboard sign that reads, "Union." The entire factory falls silent. Workers put down their tools. Slowly, one by one, they turn off their machines in solidarity. It is a moment of quiet revolution, and Sally played it with such raw conviction that audiences felt the electricity in their bones. It wasn't just a performance, it was a statement. When Norma Rae premiered, the response was overwhelming. Critics hailed Sally's performance as fearless, authentic, and transformative. She wasn't just convincing, she was unforgettable. And when award season arrived, the film carried her all the way to the Academy Awards. On April 14, 1980, Sally Field walked onto the stage at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion and accepted the Oscar for Best Actress. For Sally, it was more than a victory. It was vindication. After years of humiliation in roles she despised, after years of being dismissed as that girl from The Flying Nun, she had finally earned Hollywood's highest honor. In her acceptance speech, Sally expressed her gratitude with humility and awe. She spoke of how far she had come, of how deeply she valued the recognition, It was not just an award. It was proof that she had broken free of the box she had been forced into. With Norma Rae, Sally Field had arrived as one of the most respected actresses of her generation. She was no longer fighting for recognition. She had claimed it, but her journey was far from over. The 1980s would bring even greater triumphs and devastating personal challenges that would continue to shape both her career and her life. By 1984, Sally Field was no longer the underestimated sitcom actress she once had been. Her triumph in Norma Rae had secured her a place among Hollywood's most respected performers. Yet, beneath the accolades and success, Sally was still haunted by something deeper, an unshakable sense of insecurity. Her entire life, she had been fighting for validation. From the painful rejection she felt as a child, to the humiliation of the flying nun, to the years of being told she wasn't good enough for serious roles. Those wounds never truly left her. Every script, every audition, every performance carried the same silent question: will they finally accept me? That question came to a head with Places in the Heart. The film, set in Depression-era Texas, told the story of a widow struggling to keep her family's farm alive after the sudden death of her husband. The character of Edna Spaulding demanded strength, resilience, and vulnerability. Qualities Sally knew intimately from her own battles in life and career. On screen, she gave everything. Edna's quiet determination mirrored Sally's own. The performance was stripped of glamour, rooted instead in raw humanity. Critics immediately recognized the brilliance of her work, calling it one of the finest performances of her generation. And once again, awards season came calling. At the 57th Academy Awards in 1985, Sally Field won her second Oscar for Best Actress, an achievement that very few actors in history had managed. It was the ultimate confirmation of her talent. But what the world remembers most is not the award itself, but the speech she gave that night. Standing before the crowd, clutching her golden statue, Sally tried to put into words what the moment meant to her. What came out was both awkward and unforgettable. "I can't deny the fact that you like me right now, you like me." Though often misquoted as, "you like me, you really like me," the essence of the speech was clear. It was not arrogance. It was relief. It was the raw cry of a woman who had spent her life begging to be seen, respected, and loved. The audience erupted in applause, but behind the laughter and cheers, there was something far more profound happening. Sally Field had exposed her deepest vulnerability on the world's biggest stage. Her words revealed just how much she had needed that moment. Not for fame, not for fortune, but for validation. For Sally, that Oscar wasn't just a career milestone. It was personal redemption. After decades of doubt, rejection, and humiliation, she had proof, undeniable proof, that she was enough. Of course, over time, the speech was often mocked, parodied, and misunderstood. Some accused her of being overly sentimental or self-indulgent. But in truth, her words were painfully human. They reflected the insecurity that so many people carry but rarely admit. Sally had simply said it out loud. Looking back, she admitted that the speech embarrassed her. But she also stood by the honesty of it. Because for Sally Field, that moment was real. It wasn't polished or rehearsed. It was the voice of a little girl inside her finally being heard. Winning a second Oscar placed her in the company of legends. It cemented her reputation as one of the most gifted and versatile actresses of her generation. Hollywood could never again dismiss her. But even as her career soared, her personal life remained complicated. Fame and success did not erase the pain of her past, nor did they protect her from the struggles that lay ahead. The world loved Sally Field, but Sally herself was still learning how to love the person she had become. Even with 2 Oscars to her name, Sally Field quickly discovered that success in Hollywood was never permanent, especially for women. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Sally's career should have been unstoppable. She had proven her versatility in drama, comedy, and television. She had earned the respect of critics, audiences, and peers alike. But Hollywood has always been unkind to women as they age, and Sally was no exception. As she entered her 40s, the offers began to slow. The industry that once celebrated her suddenly seemed to look past her. Casting directors stopped calling. As frequently, and when they did, the roles were smaller, less meaningful, and often humiliating. The truth was brutal. While male actors were still offered leading roles well into their 50s and 60s, women like Sally were quietly pushed aside. She later admitted how devastating it was to sit at home, watching opportunities vanish, not because she had lost her talent, but simply because she had grown older. For someone who had spent her entire life battling insecurity, the rejection cut deeply. Sally often slipped into depression during these years, plagued by doubts about her worth. Had she peaked too soon? Had Hollywood already forgotten her? The same industry that had once doubted her abilities now doubted her relevance. And for Sally, it felt like a second kind of exile. Still, she fought back in the only way she knew how, through persistence. She continued to audition, continued to demand roles that challenged her, even when doors were slammed in her face. But the fight was exhausting, and the silence of the phone was often louder than any applause she had ever received. She spoke candidly years later about the despair of those times. Despite her accomplishments, despite her 2 Academy Awards, she felt invisible. Hollywood's obsession with youth had made her feel disposable, and it nearly broke her. What made it worse was the contradiction. Audiences still adored her. Fans still remembered Norma Rae, Sybil, and Places in the Heart. But in the offices of producers and executives, she was often dismissed as too old, not marketable, or past her prime. It was an insult not just to her career, but to her very identity. For Sally Field, acting was not just a job. It was her lifeline, her way of making sense of the world, her way of healing. To be shut out was to lose a part of herself. And yet, even in the depths of rejection, Sally refused to give up. She leaned on her resilience, the same resilience that had carried her from a troubled childhood to Hollywood's biggest stage. She began to see the fight not as a curse, but as a calling, a chance to confront Hollywood's double standards head-on. Through the pain, Sally grew bolder. She became outspoken about sexism and ageism in the industry, refusing to stay silent about the inequalities she had endured. She knew she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every actress who would come after her. And slowly, her persistence paid off. But in those years of darkness, Sally Field came face to face with her deepest fear, that no matter how hard she fought, no matter what she achieved, Hollywood would always see her as disposable. It was a cruel reminder that even for the most celebrated stars, fame is fleeting. And for women in Hollywood, it can vanish almost overnight. While Sally Field's career was marked by triumphs and comebacks, her personal life was far more turbulent. For all her strength and resilience, love was an area where she often felt vulnerable, exposed, and at times deeply wounded. Her first marriage came early, at just 20 years old, to her high school sweetheart Stephen Craig. For a brief time, it seemed like a fairy tale. The couple welcomed 2 sons, and Sally poured herself into motherhood while balancing her career. But the pressures of young marriage, combined with the demands of fame, proved too much. The relationship unraveled, leaving Sally divorced by her late 20s. She later admitted she had rushed into the marriage, searching for security she never truly found. Her second marriage, to producer Alan Greisman, brought her another son, and at first, the promise of stability. But once again, cracks began to show. The marriage collapsed after less than a decade, leaving Sally feeling disillusioned and questioning whether lasting love was something she would ever know. But it was her relationship with Burt Reynolds that became the most defining and most damaging romance of her life. The two met in the late 1970s, during a time when both were at the height of their fame. To the outside world, they were Hollywood's golden couple. Burt, the charismatic leading man, and Sally, the talented actress who had just proven herself with Norma Rae. Together they starred in a string of films, including the smash hit Smokey and the Bandit, and fans adored their on-screen chemistry. But behind the curtain, the relationship was anything but glamorous. Sally later revealed that Burt was controlling, belittling, and often cruel. He sought to dominate her, emotionally and psychologically, and over time, his behavior eroded her confidence. She described feeling trapped in a cycle of love and pain, unable to fully leave, yet suffering when she stayed. Burt, for his part, would later admit that Sally was the love of his life. But for Sally, the relationship was not a story of enduring romance. It was a toxic, damaging chapter that left her scarred. She carried the weight of his put-downs and manipulations long after the relationship ended. In her memoir, she bravely detailed the painful truth that what the public saw as a glamorous love affair was, in reality, one of the most difficult experiences of her life. The turbulence of her love life only deepened Sally's insecurities. Each failed marriage, each heartbreak, left her questioning her own worth. She wanted, more than anything, to be truly seen and cherished. Instead, she often found herself diminished, overshadowed, or abandoned. And yet even here, Sally showed resilience. She never allowed these relationships, no matter how painful, to define her completely. She raised her children with devotion, building a family life that became her anchor. Her sons would later describe her as both fiercely protective and endlessly supportive, proving that while her romantic relationships faltered, her role as a mother never wavered. Still, the scars remained. Sally Field's volatile love life was a reminder that even the brightest stars often live with hidden heartbreak. For Sally, the stage and the screen became places of escape and healing, a world where she could transform pain into art. But, off-screen, she carried the private wounds of a woman who, despite fame and admiration, longed for a love that would not hurt her. And as she would later reflect, surviving those turbulent years wasn't just about enduring heartbreak, it was about reclaiming herself, piece by piece, after relationships that had tried to break her down. Through all the storms of Hollywood, through broken marriages, and through the loneliness of fame, one part of Sally Field's life gave her true purpose: motherhood. Raising her three sons, Peter, Eli, and Sam, was not just a role she played. It was the role that defined her. For Sally, being a mother was not about image, not about applause, not about red carpets or awards. It was about love. Real, unconditional love. The kind she had longed for as a child but never fully received. She often spoke of how her boys grounded her. When the cameras were off, when the industry rejected her, when she doubted herself, her sons gave her reason to keep going. They became her anchor, her foundation, her daily reminder of what truly mattered in a world that often felt shallow and cruel. Sally poured everything into being the mother she wished she'd had. She was determined that her sons would never feel abandoned the way she did after her parents' divorce. She attended school events, balanced filming schedules around family, and made their home life as stable as possible, even when her own relationships fell apart. And in time, motherhood became more than a source of healing. It became her greatest pride. Her youngest son, Sam, gave her one of the most profound lessons of all. When he came out as gay, Sally's response was one of unconditional support. She stood by him, embraced him, and celebrated his truth. For Sally, it was simple. Love is love, and no parent should ever deny their child the freedom to be who they are. But her support didn't end at home. Sally became a fierce public advocate for LGBTQ+ rights. She used her platform to speak out against discrimination and intolerance, often recalling how deeply personal the issue was for her as a mother. She joined campaigns, gave speeches, and urged parents everywhere to love their children unconditionally. In 2012, her advocacy was recognized when she received the Human Rights Campaign's Ally for Equality Award. Standing before an audience of activists and families, she spoke from the heart about her son Sam and the pride she felt in him. Her voice cracked with emotion as she explained that no parent should ever be on the other side of their child's happiness. That moment revealed a truth more powerful than any movie role. Sally Field's greatest legacy wasn't just in Hollywood. It was in the love she gave her family. For a woman who had endured so much trauma in her own childhood, motherhood became her way of breaking the cycle. It was her chance to heal, not just herself, but generations to come. Through her sons, she found not only purpose, but also redemption. And while the world often saw her as the actress with 2 Oscars, Sally herself knew that her greatest achievement was far more personal. It was the family she raised, the love she gave, and the unwavering bond she built with her children. In the end, it was not fame or fortune that gave Sally Field her deepest fulfillment. It was the quiet, everyday triumph of being a mother, and the unshakable truth that no matter what Hollywood took from her, nothing could take that away. By the late 1980s, Sally Field was at the height of her career. An acclaimed actress with 2 Oscars, respected in Hollywood and adored by fans. But in 1988, her life nearly came to a sudden, devastating end. That year, Sally and her family boarded a private jet bound for Aspen, Colorado. It was supposed to be a routine flight, a holiday getaway, a chance to breathe away from the chaos of Hollywood. But what began as a peaceful journey quickly spiraled into a nightmare. As the plane attempted to land at Aspen's notoriously dangerous airport, something went terribly wrong. The aircraft skidded on the icy runway, veered out of control, and finally burst into flames. In those terrifying seconds, Sally truly believed it was the end. She later recalled the chaos, the deafening sound of metal grinding against asphalt, the sudden jolt of the impact, the heat of fire, and the screams of panic as passengers scrambled to escape. It was the kind of moment where time slows down, every second stretching into eternity. Sally could feel her heart pounding, her mind racing with one thought: is this really how it ends? Miraculously, she and her family made it out alive. Physically, she was unharmed. But emotionally, the experience left deep scars. Walking away from that fiery wreckage, Sally understood something she had never fully grasped before: how fragile life really is. She began to reflect on all that she had endured. Her troubled childhood, the abuse she had suffered, the struggles, to be taken seriously as an actress, the heartbreaks in her personal life. And suddenly, every hardship seemed small compared to the simple miracle of being alive. In the aftermath of the crash, Sally embraced life with a renewed sense of gratitude. She became more protective of her family, more mindful of her time, and more determined to live with intention. Fame and accolades had always carried weight for her, but now survival itself felt like the greatest gift. The crash also deepened her sense of mortality. For someone who had always been driven by ambition, the experience forced her to slow down and reconsider what truly mattered. Awards and roles might fade, but family, love, and gratitude became her compass. Though she rarely spoke publicly about the incident, those close to her noticed a shift. She laughed more. She hugged her children tighter, and she began to treasure the small, everyday moments, things she had often overlooked in the rush of a demanding career. The Aspen plane crash could have ended Sally Field's story forever. Instead, it became a turning point, an invisible marker in her life that reminded her of just how fleeting it all is, and how precious each day can be. For someone who had already walked through fire in so many ways, this literal brush with death only strengthened her resilience. Sally had survived childhood trauma, Hollywood's rejection, toxic relationships, and now, she had survived death itself. And from that moment forward, Sally Field carried with her not just the scars of the past, but also a renewed sense of gratitude that would guide her into the next chapter of her extraordinary life. By the mid-2000s, Sally Field had already lived through decades of highs and lows, personal heartbreak, professional triumph, and brushes with tragedy. But in 2005, she faced yet another challenge, one that would strike at her very sense of strength and independence. That year, Sally was diagnosed with osteoporosis, a condition that weakens the bones and leaves millions of women vulnerable to fractures and long-term health struggles. For many in Hollywood, such news might have been kept private, hidden away in fear of appearing weak or aging in an industry obsessed with youth. But Sally refused to stay silent. Instead, she chose honesty. She spoke openly about her diagnosis, determined to use her voice to help other women recognize the warning signs of what she called the silent disease. She partnered with awareness campaigns, sharing her story in interviews, public service announcements, and community programs. Her courage helped bring osteoporosis into the spotlight, giving countless women the chance to seek treatment before it was too late. But Sally's advocacy didn't stop there. Her life experiences, the trauma of childhood, the sexism of Hollywood, the heartbreak of toxic relationships, had left her with a profound sense of justice. She began to channel her voice into larger causes, becoming an outspoken supporter of women's rights and social justice. She marched, she campaigned, she gave speeches that were raw and unapologetic. Sally used her celebrity not just to win roles, but to amplify issues often ignored. She spoke about the importance of equality in Hollywood, the need for stronger protections for women, and the moral responsibility of artists to stand for something greater than themselves. Her political advocacy also grew stronger. She supported progressive candidates, lent her voice to campaigns, and never shied away from controversy if it meant standing on the side of what she believed was right. Some criticized her, but Sally didn't care. After a lifetime of surviving both public judgment and private pain, she no longer sought everyone's approval. Her resilience became part of her identity. Just as she had once used acting to escape her trauma, now she used her platform to fight for change. Whether speaking about health, women's equality, or broader social justice, Sally proved that her strength went far beyond the screen. For many fans, this chapter of her life was just as inspiring as her film career. Sally Field wasn't just a two-time Oscar winner. She was a survivor who turned personal pain into public advocacy, reminding women everywhere that their voices and their health mattered. The little girl who once felt voiceless had grown into a woman unafraid to speak truth to power. And through it all, Sally's courage in confronting her own health battle only deepened the admiration and respect of audiences worldwide. Today, at 78 years old, Sally Field's legacy reaches far beyond the silver screen. She is not only one of America's most celebrated actresses, but also a woman who has lived, endured, and survived some of life's darkest storms. Her story is one of pain and resilience, heartbreak and triumph, a reminder that strength is not the absence of suffering, but the determination to rise above it. When people look at Sally Field's career, the first thing they see are the accolades: 2 Academy Awards, 3 Emmy Awards, a Golden Globe, and the admiration of critics around the world. Her filmography is filled with unforgettable performances: Norma Rae, Places in the Heart, Steel Magnolias, Mrs. Doubtfire, and Forrest Gump, each one capturing a different layer of human emotion. Few actresses have managed to embody vulnerability and strength so seamlessly, and it is this balance that has made her one of the most respected talents in Hollywood history. But behind the curtain of fame, Sally's legacy is far more personal. She is not simply a star who won trophies. She is a woman who battled demons and carried scars and still managed to shine. From her turbulent childhood and the trauma of abuse, to the insecurity that haunted her, even at the height of her career, she has been unflinchingly honest about the struggles that shaped her. In a world that often worships perfection, Sally showed the courage to be imperfect, and that honesty is a cornerstone of why so many admire her today. Her resilience is perhaps most visible in the way she channeled pain into art. Every role she played seemed to draw from her own life experiences, from the quiet heartbreak of mothers and wives to the fiery determination of women fighting against injustice. Her performances never felt like acting. They felt lived in, real, and raw. That was Sally's gift, to transform her wounds into truth that resonated with millions. Outside of her work, Sally's life was defined by something even more important than Hollywood's success: her role as a mother. Raising her 3 sons gave her stability and purpose, and she poured into them the unconditional love she had longed for as a child. When her youngest, Sam, came out as gay, Sally stood firmly by his side, becoming not only his fiercest supporter, but also a national advocate for LGBTQ+ rights. For her, motherhood wasn't just about nurturing, it was about creating a safe and loving world her children could thrive in, no matter who they were. And then there was her advocacy. Unlike many stars who shy away from politics or social causes, Sally used her platform to speak out on women's rights, health awareness, and social justice. After being diagnosed with osteoporosis in 2005, she could have stayed silent, but instead, she bravely stepped forward, educating millions about a disease that too often went unnoticed until it was too late. In doing so, she transformed her personal challenge into a public mission, ensuring others could find strength in her openness. Even her personal heartbreaks, like her painful relationship with Burt Reynolds, revealed a woman unafraid to tell the truth. While Burt admitted until the day he died that she was the love of his life, Sally made it clear that their relationship was toxic and controlling. By speaking openly, she gave a voice to countless women who had endured similar struggles in silence. At 78, Sally Field remains an icon not only of Hollywood, but of survival itself. Her story reminds us that behind every smile, every glamorous red carpet photo, and every shining award, there is often a hidden battle. And yet, despite all of it, she endured. She rose. She kept moving forward, even when life seemed determined to break her. Her legacy is not simply one of fame, it is one of perseverance. She taught the world that greatness is not defined by how many times you fall, but by how many times you rise again. Sally Field's life is proof that tragedy and triumph can coexist, and that sometimes the most inspiring stories are not the ones lived without pain, but the ones lived despite it. And so, as fans look back on her life and career, they don't just see an actress. They see a woman who overcame, who inspired, and who proved that no matter how heavy the weight of the past, there is always a way to move forward. At 78, Sally Field is more than a star. She is a survivor, and her story will continue to inspire generations to come. Sally Field's journey has been one of heartbreak and triumph. From the pain of a stolen childhood to the heights of 2 Academies Awards, she has lived a life that proves resilience is stronger than tragedy. At 78, her story isn't just about fame. It's about survival, courage, and the power of never giving up, no matter the obstacles. Her life reminds us that even the brightest stars carry shadows, and that true strength comes from facing them head on. Sally Field has shown the world what it means to rise again and again. And now, I want to hear from you. Which part of Sally Field's story moved you the most? Was it her early struggles, her Oscar triumphs, or the way she stood by her children through it all? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you found this story powerful, please give this video a like, because it really helps more people discover it. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, so you'll never miss more stories about the stars you thought you knew. Because behind every legend, there's a story that deserves to be told.